Hello, everyone. So, first off, I apologize if the audio quality of this isn't so great. I'm currently working at a friend and cat sitting, so if you feel like I sound like I'm in a helicopter ward, that's Lewis the cat, just hanging out. He has a very loud purr. But then the other thing is that I'm having some issues with my headset microphone, and so I'm just running off the microphone on my computer. So I apologize if the sound quality of this set of talks isn't so good, but unfortunately, it's kind of the best I can do. But I just wanted to use this video to introduce what it is that we'll be talking about this week. And this week we'll be talking about language, and we do deviate a little bit from the book. So the book goes into a lot of detail about language, but there are really some kind of bigger pictures that I want you, picture issues that I want you to walk away with this week as you think about language, and may apply. I know in the past, especially if people have had children, they've been really interested in this chapter because we'll talk a little bit about language learning and also how that process goes and how it's carried out by the brain. But also we'll talk about some of the bigger picture issues, such as how does language form and what is language. And so that's really what we'll be talking about this week. But to get us started, what I wanted to do was I wanted to have students listen to a podcast. And so this is a really great podcast that's put out by a program called Radiolab. And so if you listen to NPR, you might hear Radiolab somewhat frequently. They have a lot of really great shows. But a number of years ago, it's actually a relatively old episode now, but they did a great episode about language called Words. And usually I have a guest speaker, Dr. Fior Herm from linguistics, that comes in and has students listen to this podcast and talks a little bit about it. Unfortunately, she's on modified duties this semester and can't do the guest talk, but I still thought it would be good for students to listen to the podcast because it is a really interesting podcast and talks about some of these bigger picture issues that I've alluded to up to this point. Specifically, I'll talk about three interesting cases. The first one is a young man who's learning some of his first words at age 27. So basically getting at the issue of what is life like when you're not exposed to the idea words until late in life. The second story is about a famous does neuroanatomy. I'm completely screwing up that word, but does neuroanatomy. And basically what happens is that she loses her ability of language from a stroke. And so, right, it's interesting having an expert who knows what's actually happening in the brain, how the brain carries out language, but then finds herself personally faced with what's it like to actually lose her ability to use language. And then finally, the last story is about the emergence of a new language. And so please listen to this podcast. I provide the link here on the slide, so you can just get the link from the slides, or if you're having any problems finding the podcast, you can just go to the Radiolab website, and if you type the words, or the word words, I guess, into the search bar, you'll see the Words podcast pop up. I believe it's one of the first ones when I tested it here recently. But yes, please check out this podcast. I think it'll be of interest to you. But then also, we will have some exam questions related to the podcast. They won't be very in-depth, deep questions about the podcast, but basically some big principles that you should walk away with if you've listened to the podcast casually. So please enjoy this podcast, and hopefully it'll get you to start thinking about the idea of language and what language is.